morning and welcome to Rising. We are back. It is the year 2024, another year of Rising. How exciting is that, Briahna?
It is exciting, Robby, and I honestly cannot believe I'm still in D.C. for another election cycle. I moved here for the last one, and I guess I just can't quit you.
It's going to be a fun year-ish. I don't know that I'm ready for another Trump-Biden showdown. It's like the sequel, the reboot that no one asked for. It's like Spider-Man 11 or something. Yet here we are.
There's still some chance, diminishing as it is, that that's not the showdown we get. And at least on the Trump side of what would keep him from actually being the nominee, that is the subject of our first story today. President Trump's team has vowed to fight Maine Secretary of State after she barred the former president from the state's 2024 primary ballot. In the meantime, Shannon Bellows has suspended her ruling until the courts can rule on Trump's appeal. Now, Bellows says she was swatted this weekend over her decision. Here she is defending the ruling on MSNBC over the weekend. Let's watch.
This decision is based on Maine law and the facts that were presented to me in the Section 336 challenge. It was really important to me to look at the evidence presented in the public hearing and the law and the facts presented in the context of Maine law, sections 336, 337, and 443. It's a very detailed decision. We lay out why under Maine law, the Secretary of State has the authority, indeed the obligation, I'm duty bound to make this determination. I laid out that the record demonstrates that, in fact, the events of January 6, 2021, which were unprecedented and tragic, were an insurrection in the meaning of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And finally, in reviewing the facts presented, the evidence, the law, the history, we determined under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that Mr. Trump engaged in insurrection.
Well, some new reporting in the New York Post shines light on Bellows, who is a registered Democrat, and her political ties. Bellows has visited the Biden White House twice this year and met with President Biden on at least one occasion, according to the White House visitor logs. Now, in a Facebook post from March, Bellows shared that she was honored to meet the commander-in-chief. Meanwhile, over on CNN, even though a sympathetic legal analyst had some trouble defending Bellows' ruling. Let's check in.
Were these hearings fair? Did they comport with due process? And I think there's a question there with regard to what Maine did, because if you look at the hearing, and she details this in the ruling, they heard from one fact witness, a law professor. She based her ruling on a lot of documents, but also YouTube clips, news reports, things that would never pass the bar in normal court. She's not a lawyer, by the way. It's a smartly written decision, clearly consulted with lawyers, but this is an unelected. She's chosen by the state legislature.
She's elected by the state legislature.
Chosen, elected by the legislature, but not democratically elected. Not a knock. That's just the way it's set up in Maine. And this hearing, look, it doesn't have to be a criminal trial. We don't have to have all the protections. But I think the argument you'll hear from opponents is, one, not up to the states to do this. This is why we have all different decisions from all different states. And two, the procedures were not up to snuff.
Yeah, so this, while having the same effect, different from what went down in Colorado with at least a panel of judges weighing evidence. This is one single political figure who's not even elected by the voters of the state, making the determination in her own judgment based on, consulting with attorneys and reading documents that Trump is ineligible because he engaged in insurrection. This is an issue clearly that the Supreme Court is going to have to weigh in on to decide whether Trump's name can be on the ballot or not. This patchwork of having states, different procedures in every state decide whether Trump's going to be on the ballot. I guess it doesn't matter until a swing state decides to keep, if we're really going to play this game of Trump not appearing on every ballot. Well, it matters in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona and Nevada, et cetera. But is that the country we are, that a rival political faction can read the laws? I'm not saying there's absolutely no merit to interpreting the 14th Amendment that way. But are we really coming to the place where we're not even letting the people decide in an abstract manner?
Well, I think that yes, we should not let the people decide in the abstract if there are no factual ambiguities about whether or not someone committed an insurrection or is otherwise unqualified to be president. I think that Bellows would be well within her rights, and she would be rightly applying her authority if this were an issue of a 30-year-old running for president who does not meet the qualification of being 35, or someone who was not a native-born citizen, or one of the other things that preclude you from eligibility. The problem here is that she's making a factual determination that has not been decided in a trial context. And so it seems frankly premature, especially when you look at the language she used. Now, it's a 34-page opinion, so I don't want this to stand for the entirety of the argument that's made, but this is the operative paragraph where she concludes that Donald Trump has, in fact, participated in an insurrection. She says, I conclude that the record establishes that Mr. Trump, over the course of several months and culminating on January 6, 2021, used a false narrative of election fraud to inflame his supporters and direct them to the Capitol to prevent certification of the 2020 election and the peaceful transfer of power. I likewise conclude that Mr. Trump was aware of the likelihood for violence and at least initially supported its use, given he both encouraged it with incendiary rhetoric and took no timely action to stop it. Mr. Trump's occasional requests that rioters be peaceful and support law enforcement do not immunize his actions. A brief call to obey the law does not erase conduct over the course of months, culminating in his speech on the ellipse. Now, as we have mooted on this show often, I feel my perception is that the claims about the weeks-long efforts to fraudulently submit a fake slate of electors is a much stronger claim, demonstrating an intent to actually overthrow the election results in a way that could be considered a legitimate insurrection, overturning democracy, undermining the voters' will in those 7 states that were relevant here. The speech done on January 6th that may or may not have influenced a crowd to storm the Capitol and break into the building and do all of what happened on January 6th, I think is a much weaker claim. And seeing how she's framed it here, emphasizing largely the word, speech,
itself.
the day, what happens on January 6th, I just think she's opening herself up and opening the state up and opening Democrats up to claims that this really truly is politically motivated, because a factual determination has not yet been made about the merits of the insurrection charge.
Well, yeah, but the reason I think she or people are going to lean on the January 6th part is because insurrection, I mean, I guess this is going to be decided in the Supreme Court what exactly insurrection means, but to a lot of people, when you look up the plain meaning of the word, does involve like violence or the taking up of arms, whereas Trump's, and there was actually violence on January 6th, the weeks leading up to January 6th, where I think you can make the claim, and certainly, people prosecuting him in multiple districts are making the claim that his behavior violated the law, that he tried to remain in power illicitly. But now, whether that stuff constitutes insurrection, it might violate the law, it might be criminal, it might not be an insurrection because it didn't involve like actually gathering an armed forces to occupy buildings, do things of that nature. Whereas January 6th does have that component, but as you and I have kind of agreed, it was a riot and is not obviously planned or directed by Donald Trump in a way that was actually going to succeed at anything. Then it does get into his words and whether they constitute encouragement to riot enough, and that she's making that decision. Well, when he said actually do it peacefully, don't do this, that's not quite enough. That starts to get into some very kind of referee calling it as they see the play sort of
I agree that insurrection very much implies some violence. Now, kind of abstractly, philosophically, it seems, I don't know, wrong, like a miscarriage of justice to say that someone trying to prevent an election result with a gun is not allowed to be president. Someone trying to have that exact same outcome by fraud is allowed to be president. That seems to go against the purpose of a law and rule like that. And maybe the founders didn't contemplate what it,
Right.
In a
world
world
the founders, it's the people responding to the Civil War, right?
Right.
They were responding to was actual people attacking forts belonging to the U.S. government, that kind of thing.
Sure,
so I can see why to them insurrection matters.
You can't imagine mail, like an email or even physical mail, getting from Michigan to Washington with a fake slate of electors in a timely manner, much less electronic correspondence of fraudulent documents that could work to overturn the election process in the way that is being alleged against Donald Trump. Is this one of those things where we're trying to figure out what the founding fathers would have thought about machine guns if they had known, or abortion if they had known, or any of these kinds of things? It does seem cross purposes with the law, but I do think people who are attempting to advance this argument do have to contend with the kind of obvious implications of the word insurrection, the violent implications of the words insurrection. I will say
Sure, but
also,
that's
though,
go ahead.
If there is an argument that something about the violence on 1/6 was calculated to create some sort of delay that enabled the fraud that was happening in the preceding weeks, I think that, again, is a stronger argument. I think that's what's in a lot of Democrats' mind, that this idea that there are insurrectionists with zip ties were going to tie up members of Congress and prevent them from thwarting the plan, which I think isn't really factually supported at all.
The idea that it was deliberately calculated to do anything is actually a little fanciful if you watch the events unfold, the chaos of it not being directed, it not being expected or anticipated, least of all by Donald Trump himself, who was confused when it was going on and didn't quite know how to respond to it. He wasn't there to take over as soon as they occupied his building to hoist the Trump flag, right? He was watching TV at his hotel, I think.
Right.
So.
And I don't know that guillotining Mike Pence was going to further the agenda of Mike Pence certifying the wrong slate of electors or passing it off to the House.
More Rising right after this.